Ambassador Jake Morrison walked through the massive corridors of Galactic Council Station Harmony with measured steps. His black diplomatic uniform bore the simple blue and white flag of Earth, a symbol that had become familiar to the galaxy over the past 50 years. Behind him, his security chief Lisa Grant kept her hand close to her sidearm, while cultural liaison Ben Carter reviewed his notes on the various alien species they would face today. The station buzzed with activity, as representatives from hundreds of worlds prepared for what everyone believed would be a routine trade negotiation. Floating platforms carried delegates with tentacles, scales, and forms that defied easy description. The air recyclers worked overtime to accommodate the breathing requirements of dozens of different species, creating a complex mix of gases that would kill most life forms but somehow worked for everyone aboard. Jake had been doing this job for 15 years. He had smiled through insults, laughed at jokes about human primitiveness, and nodded politely when other species talked about Earth like it was some backward frontier world. The other ambassadors called humans the friendly Death Worlders because they came from a Class 12 Death World but acted civilized. Most species forgot that humans were dangerous at all. The main council chamber stretched out like a vast amphitheater, with delegate sections arranged in perfect circles around a central speaking platform. The Zelthian delegation sat in the place of honor, their blue-scaled forms draped in expensive robes that showed their status as one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Next to them sat the Corthex, insect-like beings whose clicking speech patterns filled the air with constant chatter. Jake took his assigned seat in the human section, which was positioned near the back with the other younger species. It was a deliberate insult that he had learned to ignore. Earth had been part of the galactic community for only 50 years, while some of these civilizations had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. The seating arrangement reminded everyone of their place in the hierarchy. The session began with the usual ceremonies. Ancient words were spoken in languages that predated most current civilizations. Incense was burned to honor species that had died out millennia ago. Jake sat through it all with the same patient smile he had worn to hundreds of these meetings. Chief Negotiator Zelthar of the Zelthian hegemony rose to address the assembly. His voice carried the authority of someone who had never been seriously challenged. We gather today to discuss new trade regulations that will benefit all civilized species in our galaxy. These regulations will ensure that primitive worlds do not disrupt the delicate balance of interstellar commerce. Jake felt his jaw tighten slightly, but he kept his expression neutral. The word primitive was always aimed at humanity, no matter how diplomatically it was phrased. Zelthar continued his speech, outlining new restrictions on trade routes, limits on colonial expansion, and requirements for cultural oversight of developing worlds. Each point was clearly designed to limit human influence in the galaxy. The other species nodded along, either agreeing with the proposals or too afraid of the hegemony to object. Furthermore, Zelthar said, his scales shifting to a deeper blue that indicated strong emotion, we have growing concerns about the military buildup in human space. No species that has been civilized for less than a century should possess such capabilities. We recommend immediate inspections of all human military facilities. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Jake could see some delegates, pointing toward the human section and whispering among themselves. He had expected this topic to come up eventually. Humanity's defensive fleets had been growing, and other species were starting to notice. Finally, Zelthar announced, we present the following ultimatum to the human delegation. The word ultimatum sent a chill through the chamber. Such direct language was rarely used in diplomatic settings. Humanity must surrender control of its outer colonies to hegemony oversight. All human military vessels must be inspected and reduced to appropriate levels for a developing civilization. Human cultural practices must be reviewed and modified to align with galactic standards. And Earth itself must accept permanent monitoring stations to ensure compliance with these requirements. The chamber fell silent. Jake could feel hundreds of alien eyes turning toward him, waiting for his response. In his peripheral vision, he saw Lisa Grant's hand move closer to her weapon. Ben Carter had stopped taking notes and was staring at the Zelthian delegation with an expression of disbelief. Jake stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. The smile that had been his diplomatic trademark for 15 years was nowhere to be seen. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with delegates from dozens of different worlds. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the massive space without the need for amplification. "You know what?" Jake said, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. "We're done playing nice." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Delegates began talking all at once, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sound that the translation system struggled to handle. Some species jumped to their feet, others recoiled in their seats, and a few began moving toward the exits. Jake raised his hand for silence, and surprisingly, the chamber quieted. Perhaps it was the tone of his voice, or maybe the complete absence of the diplomatic courtesy that had defined human interactions for 50 years. Either way, he had their attention. "For half a century we have followed your rules," Jake continued. "We have accepted your insults, your condescension, and your attempts to keep us in our place. We have smiled and nodded and played the role of the civilized Deathworlders who know their place in the galactic order." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But you have made a critical error in judgment. You have mistaken our patience for weakness. You have confused our restraint with inability, and most importantly, you have forgotten what it means to push a species from a Class 12 death world too far." Jake began walking toward the exit, followed by Lisa and Ben. The other human delegates rose from their seats and joined the procession. The chamber remained silent as they moved through the rows of alien representatives. At the chamber's main entrance, Jake turned back to address the assembly one final time. "Effective immediately, humanity withdraws from all treaties, trade agreements, and diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council. We are canceling all current negotiations and suspending all cooperative ventures." Zelthar found his voice. "You cannot simply withdraw from galactic civilization. There are procedures, protocols that must be followed." Jake's smile returned, but it was nothing like the diplomatic expression he had worn for 15 years. This smile was cold and sharp and carried the promise of things to come. "You wanted to see what Deathworlders are really like when they stop following your rules. You'll get your wish, but remember this moment because you asked for this." The human delegation left the chamber, their footsteps echoing in the silence they left behind. Within hours, the news would spread across the galaxy. The humans had finally stopped playing nice, and nobody knew what that really meant. Captain Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of what every alien species believed was an exploration vessel called the New Horizon. The ship's exterior showed the clean white hull and peaceful blue markings that marked it as a civilian research vessel. The bridge looked like something from a university, with scientific instruments and star charts covering every surface. But Amy was not a scientist, and the New Horizon was not what it appeared to be. 3 hours after Ambassador Morrison's speech at the Galactic Council, Amy received the message she had been waiting for her entire career. The communication came through channels that did not officially exist, using codes that no alien intelligence service had ever cracked. The message was simple. The gloves were off. Amy walked to a panel that had been disguised as an atmospheric control system and placed her palm on the scanner. The bridge around her began to change. Walls slid away to reveal tactical displays that could track every ship within 100 light-years. The peaceful scientific instruments transformed into weapon controls that could level continents. The IDAR comfortable chairs became battle stations designed for extended combat operations. "All hands, this is the captain," Amy announced over the ship's communication system. "Operation Revelation is now in effect. Drop the disguise. Show them what we really are." Throughout the ship, crew members who had pretended to be researchers for years began opening sealed compartments that contained military equipment. The ship's outer hull began to shift as armor plating extended over the false civilian exterior. Weapon ports opened along the hull, revealing guns that could punch through the shields of most alien warships. Within 10 minutes, the New Horizon had transformed from a peaceful exploration vessel into a dreadnought-class warship that was more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen, and it was not alone. Across human space, similar transformations were taking place. Captain Danny Walsh commanded what the aliens thought was a mining station in the asteroid belt of the Ross system. When the order came through, the mining equipment retracted into the asteroid's surface, revealing a fortress with enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. The miners became soldiers, and the peaceful operation became a military stronghold. Commander Sandra Brown had been running what appeared to be a research facility on the edge of human space, studying strange energy readings from a nearby nebula. The facility had hosted visitors from a dozen different species over the years, all of whom had filed reports describing the small, harmless installation. When Sandra received her orders, the facility's true purpose became clear. The energy readings had been tests of a weapon system that could disrupt faster-than-light travel across entire star systems. Admiral Steve Collins had been humanity's most visible military commander for the past decade, leading what the galaxy believed was a small defensive fleet tasked with protecting Earth from pirates and raiders. His ships were old, his tactics were conventional, and most alien military analysts considered him barely competent. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. Steve stood in the command center of what had appeared to be a simple space station orbiting Earth's moon. The station had been a popular destination for alien tourists who wanted to see how a primitive species lived. They had taken pictures, bought souvenirs, and filed reports about humanity's quaint attempts at space colonization. The tourists had never seen the station's true interior. As Steve watched, massive sections of the structure began to separate and transform. What had appeared to be a single small station revealed itself as a fleet of battle cruisers that had been docked together. Each ship was equipped with weapons and defenses that surpassed anything in the galactic arsenal. "Fleet command to all vessels," Steve broadcast on frequencies that the aliens had never detected. "Begin Operation Unfold. Let them see what we've been hiding." Across human space, the transformation continued. The colony on New Terra had been a favorite study site for alien anthropologists who wanted to observe human social development. The colonists had played their parts perfectly, acting like simple farmers trying to make a living on a difficult world. When the order came, the farms retracted into underground bunkers, revealing a military installation that could house and supply 1,000,000 soldiers. Dr. Patricia Lee had been humanity's chief scientist for external relations, always eager to share human discoveries with other species. She had given lectures across the galaxy about human achievements in medicine, agriculture, and peaceful space exploration. The aliens had always been politely interested in her work, though they considered human science to be centuries behind their own. Patricia stood in her laboratory on Europa, surrounded by equipment that she had never shown to alien visitors. The research she had shared with the galaxy represented perhaps 1% of humanity's actual scientific capabilities. The other 99% had been classified at levels that did not officially exist. She activated a communication system that bypassed every known method of galactic surveillance and sent a message to research facilities across human space. Within minutes, reports began flooding in about technologies that would revolutionize galactic civilization. Faster-than-light communication systems that worked instantly across any distance. Medical treatments that could extend most species' lifespans by centuries. Energy sources that could power entire star systems. But Patricia's most important work was not in creation, but in understanding. For 50 years, human scientists had been studying every alien species they encountered. They knew the genetic weaknesses of the Zelthians, the psychological triggers that could break Cortex morale, and the social structures that held every major civilization together. This knowledge had been gathered carefully, quietly, and with a patience that only a species from a death world could maintain. The galaxy's intelligence networks went into overdrive as reports flooded in from across human space. The small, peaceful human colonies that had seemed so harmless were revealing themselves as fortress worlds. The modest defensive fleets were showing capabilities that surpassed the best ships in the galactic arsenal. The friendly human scientists were demonstrating technologies that most species would not develop for centuries. President Carl Davis sat in his office in New Washington, watching the reports come in from across human space. For 50 years, he and his predecessors had maintained the greatest deception in galactic history. They had convinced hundreds of advanced civilizations that humanity was exactly what it appeared to be. A young, primitive species that was grateful to be accepted into galactic society. The truth was far more complex. Humanity had been studying the galaxy since before they had made official contact. They had learned about every major civilization, mapped every important star system, and identified every potential threat. When they had finally revealed themselves to the galaxy, they had done so with a complete understanding of what they were dealing with. The decision to appear weak had been a calculated strategy. By seeming harmless, humanity had been able to establish colonies, build trade relationships, and position themselves throughout the galaxy without causing alarm. They had learned everything they needed to know about their neighbors while revealing nothing important about themselves. Now that strategy was paying off. The galaxy had spent 50 years underestimating humanity, and they were about to learn the cost of that mistake. Carl activated a communication system that had been hidden in plain sight within the Galactic Communication Network. Human technicians had been maintaining and improving the galaxy's communication infrastructure for decades, and they had built backdoors into every major system. When Carl spoke, his words would be heard on every inhabited world in the galaxy, regardless of what their governments wanted. People of the galaxy, Carl began, his voice carrying to billions of beings across thousands of worlds. For 50 years, humanity has tried to find its place among you as equals. We have followed your rules, respected your customs, and contributed to your civilization. We have been patient when you called us primitive, understanding when you treated us as children, and forgiving when you insulted our world and our people. He paused, letting his words sink in across the galaxy. But you have made a choice. You have decided that peaceful coexistence is not enough. You want to control us, diminish us, and reduce us to the status of your subjects. This is not acceptable. The transmission continued, reaching every corner of galactic civilization. You have 30 standard days to reconsider your position, withdraw your ultimatum, treat humanity as an equal partner in galactic affairs, and we can return to the peaceful relationship we have maintained for 50 years. Continue on your current path, and you will learn why species from death worlds do not make good subjects. The message ended, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence. For the first time in their history, a species had addressed the entire galaxy, without permission, using technology that should not have existed. The implications were staggering. In the Zelthian capital, emergency meetings were called as government officials tried to understand what they were facing. The humans had just demonstrated capabilities that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about technological development. The 30 days passed like a countdown to disaster. Across the galaxy, species chose sides or tried to remain neutral as the tension built. The Hegemony Alliance refused to back down, believing that humanity was bluffing. They had seen human technology, but they convinced themselves that it was stolen or borrowed from more advanced species. The idea that humans had developed these capabilities on their own was too threatening to accept. Vice Admiral Helen Brooks stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching the enemy fleet approach through the Kepler system. Intelligence reports had indicated that the hegemony would test human resolve with a limited strike against the outer colonies. Helen had been positioned here with a battle group that officially consisted of 12 ships. The enemy had brought 47 vessels, including 3 heavy cruisers that could destroy planets. The hegemony commander opened a communication channel, his arrogant voice filling the bridge. Human vessels, you are ordered to surrender immediately. Your colonies in this system are now under hegemony control. Submit to boarding, and your crews will be treated according to galactic law. Helen looked at her tactical officer, Commander Rick Davis, who simply nodded. The enemy had no idea what they were facing. The 12 ships in Helen's battle group represented more firepower than most species could deploy across their entire territory. But the hegemony fleet still thought they were facing primitive deathworlders with stolen technology. Hegemony fleet, Helen responded, her voice calm and professional. This is your only warning. Leave this system immediately or face the consequences. The alien commander laughed, a sound that the translation systems rendered as harsh and mocking. "You are outnumbered 4-1, human. Your threats are meaningless. Prepare to be boarded." Helen cut the communication and turned to her weapons officer. "Lieutenant Clark, you may fire when ready." The battle that followed would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations. The hegemony ships advanced in standard formation, using tactics that had proven successful against dozens of different species over the centuries. They expected the humans to either retreat or attempt some desperate last stand using conventional weapons. Instead, they encountered something that had never existed in the galaxy before: a military force that had evolved from centuries of warfare on a death world, equipped with technology that had been developed in secret for decades. The first hegemony ship to die never knew what hit it. The human weapons fired projectiles that moved at significant fractions of light speed, striking with the force of nuclear explosions. The ship's shields, designed to stop energy weapons and conventional missiles, were useless against kinetic strikes that bypassed every known defensive system. Within the first minute of combat, 6 hegemony vessels had been destroyed. The remainder tried to retreat, but found their faster-than-light drives disabled by some kind of field effect that human ships were projecting. They were trapped in a system with enemies who fought like nothing they had ever encountered. Commander Nick Torres led the first boarding action against a crippled hegemony cruiser. His Marines wore armor that looked primitive compared to the sleek equipment used by most galactic militaries, but appearances were deceiving. The armor was designed for fighting in environments that would kill most species instantly, and the humans inside had trained for combat since childhood. The hegemony Marines expected a conventional boarding action. They had fought dozens of different species and developed tactics for dealing with various physiologies and combat styles. But they had never faced soldiers from a death world who treated warfare as a natural part of existence. Nick's team moved through the alien ship like a force of nature. They did not advance in neat formations or follow predictable patterns. Instead, they flowed around obstacles, adapted to changing conditions, and turned every room into a trap for the defenders. When hegemony forces tried to make stands in defensible positions, the humans simply found alternate routes or created new ones by blasting through walls. The psychological impact was devastating. Hegemony soldiers who had never known defeat found themselves facing enemies who seemed to enjoy combat. The humans did not retreat when outnumbered, did not surrender when surrounded, and did not show mercy when victorious. They fought with a cold efficiency that terrified species who had grown comfortable with civilized warfare. Captain Mary Sullivan's stealth operations began simultaneously across dozens of star systems. For 50 years, humans had been quietly infiltrating alien societies, learning their languages, studying their cultures, and building networks that could be activated when needed. Mary commanded a group of operatives who had lived among other species for so long that they had almost forgotten they were human. The sabotage strikes hit every major hegemony world at the same time. Communication networks failed, transportation systems shut down, and power grids collapsed. But the targets were chosen carefully. Civilian areas remained untouched while military installations and government facilities went dark. The message was clear. Humans could have crippled entire civilizations, but they chose to focus only on strategic targets. On the Zelthian homeworld, Agent Robert Kim had spent 15 years working as a maintenance technician in the planetary defense grid. He knew every system, every backup, and every vulnerability. When the order came, he disabled the entire network from the inside, leaving the planet defenseless against attack. But no attack came. The humans simply wanted the Zelthians to know that they could have destroyed them at any time. The galaxy watched in growing horror as reports flooded in from across hegemony space. Human forces were not just winning battles, they were demonstrating capabilities that violated everything other species thought they knew about warfare. Humans did not fight armies. They fought entire civilizations. They did not seek to control territory. They sought to break the will of their enemies. General Paul Martinez coordinated the overall campaign from a command center that had been hidden beneath the surface of Mars for 30 years. The facility was larger than most alien cities and contained enough supplies to support military operations for decades. Every major campaign in galactic history had been studied here, analyzed by strategists who understood that warfare was not just about technology, but about psychology. Paul watched the tactical displays showing human forces across dozens of Star systems. The hegemony had expected a conventional war between fleets with clear battle lines and predictable outcomes. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that attacked supply lines, communication networks, and civilian morale with equal precision. Status report, Paul requested from his intelligence chief, Colonel Janet Davis. Hegemony resistance is collapsing faster than predicted, Janet replied. Their military doctrine assumes that enemies will fight for territory and resources. They have no response to our strategy of targeting their ability to coordinate and supply their forces. Paul nodded. The hegemony had spent centuries fighting species that used similar tactics and technologies. They had developed standard responses to every known form of warfare. But they had never faced enemies who treated war as an art form that had been perfected over millennia of conflict on a world that tried to kill everything that lived on it. Dr. Richard Clark's biological warfare research had produced weapons that were surgical in their precision. The modified viruses targeted specific alien genetic markers, causing temporary paralysis in enemy combatants, while leaving civilians unharmed. The weapons could have been made lethal with minimal effort, but humans chose not to cross that line. The psychological impact of restraint was often greater than the fear of destruction. The Hegemony Command tried to rally their forces by claiming that humans were using forbidden weapons of mass destruction. But when their own scientists analyzed the biological agents, they found something far more disturbing than chemical weapons. The viruses demonstrated a level of genetic engineering that was centuries beyond anything the galaxy had achieved. If humans could create weapons this precise, what else could they do? Captain Sandra Lee's forces captured the heavily fortified world of Kepler Prime without firing a shot at the civilian population. The planetary defense grid was disabled by sabotage. The military bases were neutralized by orbital strikes, and the government buildings were occupied by Marines who seemed to appear from nowhere. But instead of the massacre that everyone expected, the humans began implementing reconstruction programs. The occupying force brought medical supplies, improved the water treatment systems, and began repairing infrastructure that had been damaged in previous conflicts. The local population, who had been told that humans were savage deathworlders, found themselves living better under human occupation than they had under their own government. This was perhaps the cruelest aspect of human warfare. They did not destroy their enemies. They showed them what they could have had if they had chosen cooperation over conquest. The psychological impact of human mercy was devastating to species that had convinced themselves they were fighting monsters. Admiral Frank Moore's fleet tactics incorporated weapons that the galaxy had never seen before. Relativistic projectiles launched from ships that remained outside conventional sensor range struck targets with pinpoint accuracy. General Paul Martinez stood before the largest tactical display in the solar system, watching as red markers representing hegemony forces began disappearing from the galactic map. What had started as a limited conflict was escalating into something the galaxy had never seen before. The Hegemony Alliance was calling in every favor, activating every alliance and mobilizing every ship they could find. They were no longer fighting to conquer humanity. They were fighting to survive. But Paul knew something that the enemy did not. The war so far had been humanity operating under severe restrictions. The weapons they had used, the tactics they had employed, and the targets they had chosen were all limited by rules of engagement designed to minimize civilian casualties and infrastructure damage. If the hegemony wanted to escalate the conflict, humanity was prepared to show them what unrestricted warfare looked like. Intelligence report, Paul requested from his aide, Lieutenant Colonel Janet Davis. Sir, Hegemony Command is mobilizing their core fleets, Janet replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was reporting. They're pulling ships from every border, every patrol route, every defensive position. Preliminary estimates suggest they're assembling a force of over 3,000 vessels. Paul nodded calmly. The number would have terrified most military commanders in the galaxy. 3,000 ships represented the combined military might of dozens of advanced civilizations, But Paul had been preparing for this moment for his entire career. "And our response?" he asked. "Operation Deep Strike is ready for implementation," Janet confirmed. "All assets are in position." Paul activated his command authority and spoke into the communication system that connected him to human forces across the galaxy. "All commands, this is General Martinez. The enemy has chosen total war. We will show them what that means. Execute Operation Deep Strike. No more restrictions, no more mercy. Show them the abyss." The first target was the Zelthian communication hub at Proxima Station. The facility was considered impregnable, protected by shields that could withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons, and defended by a fleet that had never known defeat. But Colonel Janet Davis had been planning this operation for 5 years, studying every system, every weakness, and every possible approach. The attack began with something the galaxy had never seen before: humans using their own biology as a weapon. The Zelthians breathed a mixture of gases that was toxic to most species, but human lungs had evolved on a world where the atmosphere itself was trying to kill them. A team of human commandos in specialized suits infiltrated the station by hiding in the air recycling system, moving through vents that no other species could survive. The commandos did not plant bombs or destroy equipment. Instead, they introduced a modified virus into the station's life support system. The virus was designed by Dr. Richard Clark specifically for Zelthian physiology, causing temporary paralysis without permanent harm. Within hours, the entire crew of 3,000 Zelthians was unconscious, but alive. The station's defenses, now unmanned, were easily bypassed by human ships that had been waiting just outside sensor range. The facility that had taken decades to build and was considered the communication hub of the Eastern Galaxy was captured without a single shot being fired. But the psychological impact was devastating. If humans could take Proxima Station so easily, nowhere in hegemony space was safe. Captain Sandra Lee commanded the occupation force that took control of the station. Her orders were specific: demonstrate human capabilities while maintaining the moral high ground. The Zelthian crew was treated with medical care, provided with comfortable quarters, and given access to communication with their families. The message was clear: humans could have killed them all but chose not to. "This is Captain Lee to all hegemony forces," she broadcasted from the station's main communication array. "Proxima Station is now under human control. The crew is alive and unharmed. We could have destroyed this facility and everyone on it, but we chose restraint. Remember that choice when you decide how this war continues." Dr. Richard Clark's research laboratories on Europa were working around the clock to develop new applications for human biological expertise. The galaxy had always underestimated human medicine, viewing it as primitive compared to their own advanced techniques. They were about to learn that medicine could be a weapon when applied by a species that truly understood biological systems. The modified viruses that targeted hegemony personnel were just the beginning. Richard's team had developed aerosol compounds that could cause mass hallucinations in Cortex soldiers, hormonal disruptors that made Velrani civilians unable to feel fear or aggression, and pheromone bombs that caused complete social breakdown in hive-minded species. None of these weapons were lethal, but they demonstrated a level of biological warfare capability that terrified the galaxy. "Status report on Project Mercy," Richard requested from his chief researcher, Dr. Lisa Grant. "All compounds are ready for deployment," Lisa replied. "We can neutralize entire fleets without killing a single enemy combatant. The question is whether we should." Richard considered this. The galaxy was watching how humans conducted this war. Every action would be judged by species that might become future allies or enemies. Showing restraint now would pay dividends for generations. "Deploy the non-lethal compounds only," Richard decided. "Let them know we could have chosen differently." Admiral Kevin Johnson's fleet operations had moved beyond conventional warfare into something that resembled an art form. His ships appeared and disappeared across hegemony space like ghosts, striking targets that should have been impossible to reach and vanishing before enemy forces could respond. The key was technology that the galaxy did not even suspect existed. Human Ships were equipped with cloaking devices that rendered them invisible to every known form of detection. But more importantly, they could manipulate space-time itself, allowing them to travel vast distances in minutes rather than days. The hegemony fleet admirals were trying to fight an enemy that could appear anywhere, strike any target, and disappear before reinforcements arrived. The psychological warfare was devastating. Hegemony crews never knew when or where humans would strike next. The uncertainty was breaking down military discipline and causing panic in the ranks. Some ships were abandoning their posts without orders, while others were reporting human attacks that had never happened. Colonel Maria Santos led ground forces that were redefining what planetary assault meant. Traditional galactic warfare involved massive bombardments followed by conventional ground invasions. Human tactics were entirely different. Maria's forces could take entire worlds without the enemy ever seeing them coming. The assault on the fortress world of Draken Prime became legendary across the galaxy. The planet was defended by millions of soldiers, protected by orbital defense platforms, and considered absolutely impossible to conquer. Maria's force consisted of fewer than 10,000 Marines. The battle was over in 6 hours. The humans did not attack the defenses directly. Instead, they targeted the infrastructure that supported the military forces. Power grids failed, communication networks went dark, and supply depots exploded in carefully timed sequences. By the time the defending forces realized they were under attack, their ability to coordinate a response had been eliminated. But the most devastating aspect of the assault was what happened next. Instead of occupying the planet with military force, the humans began distributing food, medical supplies, and emergency equipment to the civilian population. The people who had been told that humans were savage deathworlders found themselves being helped by the same forces that had just defeated their military. General Chris Anderson commanded the largest human fleet ever assembled, though its true size remained hidden from enemy observation. The ships were spread across dozens of star systems, appearing to be separate patrol groups rather than a unified force. When the order came to reveal their true strength, the galaxy would learn that humanity had been holding back far more than anyone had suspected. "Sir, long-range sensors are detecting the main hegemony battle fleet," reported his tactical officer, Commander Nick Torres. "They're moving toward the Sol system. Estimated arrival in 72 hours. Chris smiled grimly. The enemy was finally making the mistake he had been hoping for. By attacking Earth directly, they would force humanity to reveal capabilities that had been kept secret for decades. The hegemony wanted to see what humans were really capable of when pushed to their limits. "Send a message to all fleet commands," Chris ordered. "Operation Revelation is approved. Time to show them what a real fleet looks like." President Angela Foster received the military reports in her secure bunker beneath New Geneva. The war was proceeding exactly as human strategists had predicted. The hegemony was escalating the conflict step by step, forcing humanity to reveal more and more of their true capabilities. Each revelation was carefully calculated to demonstrate overwhelming superiority while maintaining the appearance of restraint. "Ma'am, we're receiving surrender offers from 17 hegemony worlds," reported her aide, Captain Danny Walsh. "They're requesting immediate cessation of hostilities in exchange for complete withdrawal from human space." Admiral Kevin Johnson stood in the command center of the largest space station ever built, watching the hegemony's final gambit unfold on the tactical displays. The enemy had gathered every ship they could find, calling in vessels from across their territory and even borrowing fleets from neutral species who feared what would happen if humanity won. The assembled armada contained over 5,000 ships, including massive dreadnoughts that could crack planets and carriers that launched swarms of fighters. They were heading directly for Earth. The irony was not lost on Kevin. For 50 years, the galaxy had treated Earth like a backwater world inhabited by primitive savages who had somehow stumbled into space travel. Now those same species were sending their entire military might to attack what they still believed was humanity's vulnerable homeworld. They were about to learn that Earth was the most heavily defended world in the galaxy. "Sir, enemy fleet will reach the Sol system in 18 hours, reported his operations officer, Commander Lisa Grant. "All defensive platforms are online and ready." Kevin nodded, then activated the communication system that would reach every human military commander in the galaxy. "This is Admiral Johnson to all fleet commands. The enemy is coming to our home. It's time to show them what that means. Execute Operation Homecoming." Across human space, fleets that had been scattered and hidden began moving toward Earth. But these were not the modest defensive forces that the galaxy had observed for decades. As the ships emerged from their concealment, the true scale of human, military power became visible for the first time. The New York, which had appeared to be a simple patrol cruiser, revealed itself as the command ship of a battle group containing 200 vessels. The Chicago, supposedly a cargo hauler, transformed into a carrier launching squadrons of fighters that moved faster than most alien ships could track. The Los Angeles, listed in Galactic records as a research vessel, began deploying weapons that could destroy moons. Captain Amy Rodriguez commanded the defense grid that surrounded Earth's solar system. To alien observers, the system appeared to contain only a few space stations and some mining operations. The reality was far different. Every asteroid had been hollowed out and converted into a weapons platform. Every seemingly empty region of space contained cloaked battle stations. The entire solar system was a fortress that had been under construction for decades. "Ma'am, we're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system," reported her sensor operator, Lieutenant Rick Davis. "The enemy is going to realize they're flying into a trap." Amy smiled grimly. "Let them realize it. By then it will be too late." The hegemony fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, expecting to face the modest defenses that their intelligence reports had described. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by weapons platforms that outnumbered their ships 50 to 1. Every asteroid, every space station, every piece of debris in the system revealed itself as a camouflaged weapon emplacement. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. As the human fleet moved to intercept the invaders, the galaxy learned that humanity had been concealing not just the size of their military, but the nature of their technology. Human ships moved without visible propulsion, changed direction without momentum, and fired weapons that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. Colonel Maria Santos led the boarding parties that would secure the enemy command ships. Her Marines wore armor that looked ancient compared to sleek alien equipment, but appearances were deceiving. The armor was designed for fighting in environments that would instantly kill most galactic species, and the soldiers inside had trained for combat, in conditions that other species used for torture. But Maria's most important weapon was not her equipment or her training. It was her understanding of alien psychology. Humans had spent 50 years studying every major species in the galaxy, learning their fears, their weaknesses, and their breaking points. When human Marines boarded enemy ships, they knew exactly how to shatter enemy morale without firing a shot. The Zelthian admiral commanding the invasion fleet found his flagship overrun by humans who seemed to appear from nowhere. His security forces, trained to fight other civilized species, had no response to enemies who moved through ship corridors like they were hunting grounds. Within minutes, Maria's team had secured the bridge and captured the entire command staff. But instead of the brutal interrogation that the Zelthian admiral expected, he found himself sitting across a table from a human officer who spoke his language perfectly and seemed to know more about Zelthian military doctrine than most Zelthian officers. "Admiral Vorthak," Maria said, consulting a tablet that contained detailed information about the alien commander. "You have 3 children on the homeworld, a wife who works in agricultural research, and a brother who commands the 4th Defense Fleet. Your military record shows courage, intelligence, and genuine concern for your soldiers' welfare." The Zelthian admiral stared at her in shock. The information she possessed should have been impossible for any human to know. "How do you know this?" he demanded. Maria leaned back in her chair, her expression calm and professional. "We know everything about everyone who matters in this galaxy. We've been watching, learning, and preparing for 50 years. The question now is whether you're smart enough to recognize reality." President Angela Foster stood in the Situation room beneath the North American Capitol, watching the battle unfold in real time. The hegemony fleet was trapped in a system that had become a weapons platform, facing human forces that operated beyond their understanding of physics and tactics. But the most important aspect of the battle was not military. It was political. "Ma'am, we're receiving communication requests from every major government in the galaxy," reported her aide, Captain Sandra Brown. "They want to mediate a ceasefire." Angela considered this. The galaxy was finally understanding what they were dealing with, but the lesson was not complete. The hegemony leadership still needed to learn that humanity would not be threatened, intimidated, or controlled by anyone. "Patch me through to the Galactic Council emergency session," Angela ordered. The transmission reached every government in the galaxy, showing them the human president standing calmly in her command center while the most powerful fleet in galactic history was being systematically destroyed around Earth. "Leaders of the galaxy," Angela began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who held absolute power. "For 50 years, humanity has tried to find a place among you as equals. We followed your laws, respected your customs, and contributed to your civilization. In return, you treated us as primitive children who needed your guidance and control." She paused, letting her words sink in across hundreds of worlds. "Today, you see the truth. We were never the junior partners in this relationship. We were never the weak species that needed your protection. We were the patient predators who chose to play by your rules because it suited our purposes." The images from the battle continued to stream across the galaxy as Angela spoke. Human ships moving in ways that defied physics, weapons that struck targets across impossible distances, and tactics that turned the enemy's strength against them. "The Hegemony Alliance demanded that we surrender our independence and submit to their control," Angela continued. "This is our response. We could have done this 50 years ago. We could have conquered the galaxy instead of joining it. We could, and every civilization that opposed us today. We choose not to. Remember that choice because we will not make it again." Dr. Richard Clark's teams had been analyzing the biological makeup of every enemy soldier captured during the battle. The data they collected would allow humanity to develop targeted biological agents that could disable entire species without permanent harm. But more importantly, it demonstrated to the galaxy that humans could have used this knowledge to commit genocide on a galactic scale. "Sir, the psychological impact is exceeding all projections," reported his assistant, Dr. Lisa Grant. "Enemy forces are surrendering rather than face capture by our boarding teams." Richard nodded. The fear was not of death. Most galactic species accepted that death was a possibility in warfare. The fear was of what humans might do to prisoners who fell into their hands. The galaxy had spent decades telling stories about the savagery of Deathworlders, and now they were discovering what that might actually mean. But the reality was exactly the opposite. Human prisoners were treated with medical care, comfortable quarters, and respect for their cultural needs. The psychological impact of humane treatment was often greater than the fear of torture. It forced enemy soldiers to confront the fact that everything they had been told about humans was wrong. General Chris Anderson's fleet revealed its true strength as the battle reached its climax. What had appeared to be a modest defensive force was actually the largest military armada in galactic history. Ships emerged from every hiding place in the solar system, from behind moons, from within asteroid fields, from cloaked positions that had been maintained for decades. The Hegemony fleet, which had seemed overwhelming just hours before, was now outnumbered 10-1 by forces that operated with technology and tactics beyond their comprehension. The battle was not a contest, it was a demonstration. 6 months after the surrender at Earth, Ambassador Robert Turner walked through the same corridors of Galactic Council Station Harmony that Jake Morrison had traveled before the war began. But everything had changed. The station's atmosphere still carried the mixed gases needed by dozens of species, but the conversations were different. Where once there had been casual dismissal of human capabilities, now there was careful respect and barely concealed fear. The seating arrangement in the main council chamber had been altered. The human delegation no longer sat in the back with the younger species. Their section was now positioned in the center of the chamber, with other delegations arranged around them in a pattern that made it clear who held real power in the galaxy. Robert took his seat and looked around the chamber. Many of the faces were familiar, but their expressions had changed completely. The arrogant confidence that had characterized alien diplomats for decades was gone, replaced by the careful politeness of beings who had learned not to provoke Deathworlders. Chief, Negotiator Zelthar, the same Zelthian who had delivered the ultimatum that started the war, rose to address the assembly. His scales had lost their bright blue coloration and now showed the gray tones that indicated stress and submission in his species. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the authority it had possessed 6 months earlier. The Galactic Council recognizes the human delegation and requests their terms for rejoining Galactic society, Zelthar said, each word carefully chosen to avoid any hint of condescension. Robert stood slowly, taking his time to look around the chamber at representatives from hundreds of worlds. These beings had spent 50 years treating humanity like primitive children who needed guidance and control. The war had taught them exactly how wrong they had been. The terms are simple, Robert began, his voice carrying clearly through the massive chamber. Humanity will rejoin Galactic society as an equal partner, not as a junior member subject to oversight. All previous restrictions on human colonization, trade, and military development are permanently canceled. Any future attempts to limit human sovereignty will be considered acts of war. Murmurs spread through the chamber, but no one objected. The delegates had seen what happened to the last group that had tried to dictate terms to humanity. Furthermore, Robert continued, humanity will share selected technologies with species that demonstrate genuine commitment to peaceful cooperation. These technologies will improve life for billions of beings across the galaxy. But advanced military applications will remain exclusively human until other species prove they can handle such power responsibly. Dr. Karen White had been working for months to establish the new Human Cultural Exchange Program. Unlike the previous programs that had been designed to civilize humanity, this initiative was intended to help other species understand what they were really dealing with. The response had been overwhelming. Every major university in the galaxy now had waiting lists of students who wanted to study human psychology, history, and culture. Karen stood in her office on Luna, looking out at the Earth that the galaxy had once dismissed as a primitive backwater. Her desk was covered with applications from alien researchers who wanted to understand how a single world had produced a species capable of dominating the galaxy while choosing to show restraint. Dr. White, the delegation from the Academic Council of Rigel, is here for their appointment, her assistant announced. The Rigel delegation consisted of the most respected scholars in that sector of the galaxy. They had come to Earth to study human educational systems, hoping to understand how Deathworlders learned to think strategically on such a vast scale. Karen welcomed them into her office, noting how carefully they moved and how respectfully they spoke. Dr. White, the lead scholar began, we have studied the tactical analyses of your recent conflict. The complexity of your strategic thinking exceeds anything in our databases. How does your species develop such capabilities? Karen smiled, remembering similar questions from before the war, when the same academics had dismissed human intelligence as primitive. We learn from our environment. Earth taught us that survival requires constant adaptation, long-term planning, and the ability to work together against threats that could destroy us. These lessons shaped how we think about everything, including warfare. Captain Daniel Moore commanded the first joint species exploration mission since the war. His ship carried scientists and researchers from a dozen different worlds, all working together to explore regions of space that had been too dangerous for individual species to investigate. The cooperation was remarkable, but Daniel noticed how carefully the alien crew members treated their human colleagues. Captain, his Zelthian science officer reported, we're detecting energy signatures consistent with ancient technology in the next system. Should we investigate? Daniel nodded. Set course for the system, and Commander, you can speak normally. We're all part of the same crew now. The Zelthian looked surprised. Sir, I do not wish to offend with inappropriate casual communication. Daniel sighed. This was the problem with being feared rather than respected. Other species were so worried. about provoking humanity that they could barely function normally around humans. It would take time to rebuild the casual friendships that had existed before the war. The exploration mission was discovering new worlds and technologies at a rate that amazed the galaxy. Human analytical methods, combined with alien expertise in various fields, created research teams that accomplished more in months than most species achieved in years. The galaxy was learning that cooperation with humans produced benefits far beyond what anyone had imagined. President Angela Foster received daily reports about the transformation taking place across human space. Former enemy worlds were requesting permission to establish trade relationships with humanity. Species that had supported the hegemony were now offering territorial concessions and technology transfers in exchange for human protection from other threats. "Ma'am, we have 17 new applications for defensive partnerships," her aide, Captain Sandra Brown, reported. "They're offering everything from resource rights to territorial access." Angela reviewed the applications, noting how desperate some species had become to align themselves with humanity. The war had demonstrated that the galaxy contained threats that could only be addressed by Deathworlder capabilities. Species that had once felt secure under hegemony protection now realized they needed human alliance to survive. But Angela was careful about which partnerships to accept. Humanity did not want to become the galaxy's police force or the dominant power that everyone either served or feared. The goal was cooperation between equals, not the subjugation of other species. Professor Marcus Lee taught the most popular class in the history of the Galactic Academy. His course on human strategic thinking had a waiting list that stretched for years, with students from every major civilization trying to understand how Deathworlders approached complex problems. The classroom was always packed with beings who hung on every word. "The key to understanding human strategy," Marcus explained to his mixed species audience, "is recognizing that we think in terms of multiple timelines simultaneously. We plan for immediate needs, medium-term goals, and long-term consequences all at the same time. Most species focus on one timeline at a time, which limits their strategic options." A Cortex student raised one of its clawed appendages. "Professor Lee, how did humanity maintain such deception for 50 years without any other species detecting the truth?" Marcus smiled at the question that he received in every class. "We told you the truth constantly. We just told you our capabilities, in a way that you interpreted as primitive rather than advanced. When we said we had learned warfare from our environment, you assumed that meant we were unsophisticated. When we demonstrated restraint, you assumed that meant we were weak. Your own prejudices prevented you from seeing reality." The lesson was being learned across the galaxy, but slowly. Species that had spent millennia believing in their own superiority were struggling to accept that they had been surpassed by beings they had considered primitive. In the cafeteria of Luna Station, children from dozens of different species played together while their parents worked on projects that benefited the entire galaxy. Human children taught alien youngsters games that developed strategic thinking, while alien children shared their species' knowledge of art, music, and philosophy. The next generation was growing up with a very different understanding of what humanity represented. 10-year-old Sarah Kim, whose father had commanded one of the fleets during the war, sat with her friend Zephyr, a young Zelthian whose scales were the bright blue of youth and optimism. They were working on a school project about galactic history. "My teacher says humans used to be scary," Zephyr said in the careful way that young Zelthians spoke. "But you're not scary." Sarah considered this. "My dad says we're only scary to people who try to hurt others. We don't want to be scary. We just want to be friends." "Can we still be friends even though our peoples fought?" Zephyr asked. "Of course," Sarah replied. "That's what friends do. They forgive each other and try to do better."